One cold and dark December night, a teenage girl named Kathy was babysitting two children. There was a 7-year-old boy named Taylor and a 6-year-old girl named Selena. The parents had gone to the movies for the night, leaving Kathy in. Just after 9 o'clock that night, the phone rang. Kathy answered it and heard an anguished voice screaming, "Help me! For heaven's sake, help me!" Confused, Kathy hung up the phone and decided that it must have just been a prank call. 30 minutes later, the phone rang again and the same voice screamed, "Help me! Somebody! Please help me!" This time, Kathy was beginning to get frightened. The children asked her who was calling and she told them not to worry, that everything was just fine. Another 30 minutes passed by and she received another call. The voice on the other end sounded scared and desperate. "Help me! For heaven's sake, won't somebody help me?" The phone went dead. Seconds later, their knock at the door. The babysitter clutched the children tightly to her. She was almost as scared as they were. The urgent knocking continued. She knew it wasn't the children's parents, because they weren't due home for at least an hour. They could hear a voice coming from outside. It was a man's voice, and he was repeating over and over, "Help me." She didn't know what to do. "I'll have to let him in," she said. "He needs help." Later that night, when the parents arrived home, the house was eerily silent. All of the lights were off. When they searched the house, they entered the living room and stumbled upon a horrible scene. Kathy and both of the children had been murdered. Their arms and legs had been chopped off. On the wall, written in blood, were the words, "For heaven's sake, help me before I kill again. I cannot control myself anymore." One day, when I was on the phone with my aunt and uncle, they told me they had heard a very strange story from a friend. Apparently, in the 1950s, there was a child who went missing in our city. She was only 4 years old and she disappeared in the evening while she was taking a bath. The mother and father were downstairs, watching TV, when they heard their daughter's screams. They ran upstairs to the bathroom, but the door was closed. They tried to open it, but it was locked. Just then, the father heard the sound of whispering coming from behind the door. He shouted his daughter's name, but there was no response. Just an uneasy silence. The mother flew into a panic. She ran out into the street, screaming and calling for help. One of their neighbors came running to see what he could do, and together, they managed to kick down the bathroom door. The room was in darkness, and there was a strange smell in the air. When they turned on the lights, the parents almost fainted at what they saw. The bathroom was a mess. The floor and walls were covered in blood. Trembling with fear, the father ran to the bathtub. The water was stained with blood, but the little girl was gone. The room was empty. The windows were tightly shut. The door had been locked. There was no way for her to get out, but somehow the little girl had disappeared. She was never found. The police investigated, but they were baffled. It seemed too impossible to figure out, and the mystery of her disappearance was never solved. Later, the mother ended up committing suicide. The father lost his mind and was confined to a mental home. I thought this story was fiction until a few days ago. It all began when I heard a strange noise coming from my bathroom. It frightened me because there was nobody else in the apartment. It was a low rumbling sound. I decided to take a look, and when I opened the bathroom door, I was shocked to see that all of the shelves with shampoos and gels had been dumped in a heap on the tiled floor. I almost screamed with fear and ran to my bedroom, locked the door behind me. All of a sudden, the lights went out and the room was plunged into total darkness. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Then something happened that I will remember for the rest of my life. I heard the sound of laughter. It was the quiet laughter of a young girl, and it sounded like it was right there in the room with me. I heard small footsteps coming towards me in the darkness. I screamed and tried to flee, but in the pitch black, I couldn't find the door handle. My hands searched and searched, but all I could feel was smooth glass. In a panic, I began to get disoriented. I couldn't see a thing. My hands roamed along the walls, desperately searching for the door. I was just shaking with fear. The cackling laughter got louder and louder. I started beating on the glass, throwing myself against it like a trapped animal. But all of a sudden, there was a loud crash as the glass shattered. The light hit my eyes and I found myself lying outside in the corridor. I got up and, without daring to look back, I ran as fast as I could. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to my apartment. I called my aunt and uncle and told them what happened. They apologized to me. They said they were sorry they told me about her, but they didn't know what else to do. The little girl had been haunting them for days, ever since they heard about her. They told me she haunts anyone who knows her story, and the only way to get rid of her is to tell someone else. Ever since then, I haven't been able to sleep. Every time I try to close my eyes, I hear her cackling laughter. It's driving me insane. But tonight is a special night, because tonight I will finally be able to get a good night's rest. Whoever you are, thank you for reading my story. Turn around and say hello to her. Late one night, my mother was driving down a lonely country road. She had her headlights on, illuminating the road ahead of her, and there were cornfields on both sides that seemed to stretch on forever. All of a sudden, she saw something lying in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes and screeched to a halt. Staring out through the windshield, she could see the body of a man lying in the road. She couldn't see his face, but it looked like he was hurt. She was about to get out of the car and see if she could help him, but at that moment, the hair on the back of her neck stood on end and alarm bells sounded in her head. Something just wasn't right. Her instinct told her to stay in the car. She decided to drive around the man and stop in the next town to call the police. The road was very narrow, and to get past him, she had to drive up onto the edge of the cornfield, crushing the stalks of corn. As she was driving away, my mother looked in the rearview mirror and saw the man in the road get to his feet and run into the cornfield. Terrified, she kept driving and didn't stop until she reached the next town. She found a payphone, called the police and told them what she had seen. A few minutes later, two officers pulled up in a police car. They followed her back to where she had seen the man lying in the road. When they got to the spot, the man was gone. My mother sat in her car with the doors locked, nervously watching the cornfields, while the police officers searched the area. In the crushed corn stalks, by the side of the road, they found the dead bodies of two men. It turned out that they had been run over. When my mother drove up on the cornfield to avoid the man in the middle of the road, she had unknowingly crushed his accomplices.